So I finally got around to seeing the new Sam Mendes movie 1917. It's a film that's presented with the illusion of technically two continuous long takes by way of sneaking in some cuts and CGI editing. It's also about two men traversing a desolate war zone in hopes of delivering a message that would save 1,600 of their troops from total annihilation. It's also kind of about World War I. If you've seen 1917, or at least how this movie is being sold to audiences, you know that they're placing precedence on this movie's technical craft, with its story and ideas on war kind of serving a supplemental role to the movie's showmanship. And this isn't to kneecap Sam Mendes' effort or passion in bringing to life his grandfather's story of surviving this journey during World War I. I definitely get the feeling that Sam Mendes was trying to tell the story honestly by placing the viewer in the role of a helpless third party or onlooker just immersed in this chaos. We see brief moments of human frailty, literally passing by decomposition of bodies and rubble, but not really the scale or weighty, towering consequence of war. So the byproduct of placing the viewer in this eye-level witness perspective carries a lot of similarities to a video game experience, especially with how the plot progresses in a sort of checkpoint fashion. And this comparison has already been made in many reviews of this film before, mostly in a positive light, but I would argue that 1917's incredibly rigid adherence to this clinical exercise of the long take actually hinders its potential to capitalize on the dynamics of filmmaking and the impact a long take can have. I don't discredit the unimaginable amount of effort it must have taken to pull off these long takes with the countless hours of coordination and choreography. The ambition of shooting almost all of this outdoors during various parts of the day using natural sources of light is certainly admirable. But after watching this movie, I left feeling as though the effect of immersion was kind of squandered by this technique. Since this is based on a valiant real-life story where the atrocities and horrors of war are serving a purpose beyond traditional entertainment, I'm confused as to why this would get a video game style treatment. When death or tragedy occurs on screen, we aren't really given a moment of character intimacy for the surviving member to process or grieve, which could have been conveyed through the use of editing. Instead, because the movie's technical agenda is at the forefront, we kind of awkwardly linger over scenes where I feel it would have benefited from refreshing the palette, like montage of the character's thoughts or his headspace, or splicing in different images to create some kind of motive. There's other ways to invoke that feeling for a character, but we don't really get to know these people at all, and we're kind of left with this strange detachment from what's happening. And you could make the argument that lingering over these atrocities is the point, and kind of illustrates the heartless nature of war. But most of this movie doesn't really delve into the psyche of war, or at least Sam Mendes' thoughts on war. A lot of this movie is just that eye-level, steady cam, walking and talking with these forced bits of character development that I can't even recall since seeing. The composition is sparse, pretty rhythmically neutral, and by that I mean the camera is almost entirely motivated by where the characters are moving, so it felt a bit restricted and lacking in room for free thinking and expressiveness from the director. The "war is bad" phrase is the only thesis this movie sort of confronts, but otherwise I found it pretty standard. A hollow, simple war movie with a consistently tedious aesthetic. And if you're a fan of this movie and you found it enthralling, then more power to you. I wish I could have felt that. Beyond the long take form where hidden cuts just remind you of the crew and camera's presence, I feel as though multiple points in this movie just reinforce the idea that there is genuine power in a cut. For me, one of the most impactful moments in 1917 was when they cut to black halfway through the movie, and the reason for this happening arguably holds more power than it would have otherwise with a long take. Cuts can instill emotion or severance, or cap off scenes or shots that would otherwise grow wearisome, especially if what we're being presented is not exactly compelling or engaging. It made me think of that 40-second long take in Saving Private Ryan, where commotion and movement just collide in this dizzying display and doesn't overstay its welcome with a cut at the end kind of punctuating the tension and allowing the audience to process. In 1917, the sense of isolation becomes ubiquitous, where even the audience doesn't know what to grab onto. Eisenstein wrote extensively about editing and montage, and how montage is an idea that arises from the collision of independent shots. He viewed movement as an idea building on top of one another as opposed to next to each other, so each impression left before is retained and subsequently creates a new idea as shots continue to mount up in sequential order. I'm not so much championing a world of cinema where long takes are never used, but in certain sequences, especially ones that need to leave that impression of tension, cutting and stringing together shots can create that rise of emotion, like in the Odessa Steps sequence, whereas otherwise you don't really find that a whole lot in the aesthetic of this long take muscular filmmaking. If all this comes across as pretentious and bitter, my intent is not to write a hit piece on 1917 and the bastardization that it is, but it provides an interesting discussion about the long take and its placement in the digital age, and how appropriately and artistically it can be used to enhance or diminish a film's quality. If I had seen this movie in theaters and before this pandemic, then maybe I would have appreciated the collision of sound and picture better, but I'm not too confident it would have fixed the emptiness of its structure and progression and evocation of war that I felt watching it at home. What do you guys think of that style and of 1917? I'm very interested in the response this film has garnered. Thank you for watching. Subscribe.